Good. Well, hello, everybody. It's Craig and Richard here for the week 3 feedback video. How are you this week, Richard?
Pretty mindful, Craig. How about you?
Totally. Oh, totally. Totally in awe of the fact that you're very mindful. I'm still a work in progress. Probably like most of our learners are. And I think this is quite an important week in the sort of the journey of mindfulness, exploring the cognitive practices. And they're kind of really implicit when we sit down to practice meditation and try to be mindful in day-to-day life. These things are kind of underpin the whole thing, about non-attachment and acceptance and being present and the mind and all of its goings on. It's sort of, we're just trying to make that more explicit. And there's been some very interesting discussions this week.
It's good to draw that out, isn't it? And start to look at them explicitly because, like you said, they're there. But I think, when we start to really notice them and even deliberately cultivate them, it can be a really good thing.
Yeah, that's right. So, for example, acceptance and letting go, we kind of recognize how important they are, but they're pretty challenging. And control is a big issue that's come up this week. Probably comes up for most of us that stuff happens in life that we'd rather wasn't happening, or somebody does something, or something turns out a way that we'd rather not like. And we kind of discover that we're not in control of everything. Have you discovered that as well, Richard?
I saw a great internet meme a couple of years ago that said, relax, nothing is under control. And I think it was a really good way to think about things. Because we think things are under control. We can control things. We can control people and situations, and the brain's always trying to predict what's going to happen. But I think if we're really honest, not that much is under control, is it?
Yeah, and you see, and that doesn't mean that we don't care and try and do things the best way we can, but we maintain a mental flexibility that here's my plans and here comes reality. And they can be two very different things. And if we're mindful enough, we can let go of the assumption, the plan, the expectation, the demand, the requirement, and just flow with things as they actually are. And that can save us a lot of grief, but it also helps us to actually adapt. And I think it's a really crucial principle underpinning resilience as well when things do go wrong.
Well, then we can just be happy in any situation, can't we? And of course, when things go wrong, if we get caught up in, it shouldn't be like this, why is it like this, it's unfair, or that kind of negative thinking, that's just adding weight to the burden. Whereas if we just accept, sometimes things go wrong, and sometimes, sometimes life is like that. If we can genuinely accept that. And of course, we're not talking about just, bad things happen, or it's normal to feel emotions, or it's normal to experience loss. If that's just happening in the mind, there's often a lot happening in the body that we then unconsciously react to. So some of our learners who are asking us about, how to be with difficult emotions, for instance, it's really about being with them moment by moment by moment in the body. And someone else asked about, what's wrong with caring deeply about certain possessions and being distraught if they're broken, especially if they represent a link to the past or something really important. And look, it's a really interesting point because, when we're practicing mindfulness, we don't want to just become this kind of bland automaton, no emotions, no ups, no downs. That's absolutely not what we're trying to cultivate. But what we do want to start to see is that if we're attached to something and we lose it, we're going to feel sad. I mean, the emotion of sadness is about letting go of things that are important. And the tighter we're trying to hold on to something, the more it's going to hurt when we lose it. Yeah. And let's be honest, everything breaks, whether it's, great grandma's crystal vase or whether it's the newest iPhone. I mean, everything's transient and impermanent. This is one of the big sort of laws of the universe, isn't it? Everything's impermanent. And if we're trying to hold on to it, eventually we are going to lose it.
Yes.
Eventually, we're going to lose everything that we care about ultimately. And so if we're holding on, that can cause a lot of distress.
And I think very often a very small perspective on something, we see something as bad when as we stand back and look at it in a bigger perspective. It's not necessarily bad. It's a step on a journey and so on. In the same way that if we take a bigger view, we have to acknowledge a fundamental truth that everything in our life is kind of impermanent. As much as we'd like things to stay the way they are, we're young and then we get older and we have success one day and something fails the next day, and ups and downs and pleasure and pain. And this is life, and life will go on, but can we experience it with less attachment to it? Because it's not just the distraught, and I think it's a really key word that the learner used, distraught, but it's also the anxiety and anticipation of loss, as well as the grief after the loss. And so if we didn't have that attachment, enjoy it while it's there.
And fully enjoy it, I'd like to add to that. We could let ourselves fully enjoy it in the knowledge that it's one day it's going to pass, it's going to be gone.
Yeah, and so if we just keep reminding ourselves of this kind of fundamental sort of truth, then we may be able to enjoy, but without all of the stuff that comes with the attachment and the anxiety and the loss.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some great questions as well, Craig, around oxytocin and seeking support.
Yeah, look, I think it's great just to have a little ampoule of oxytocin, give a squirt up the nose every time you feel like you're
be nice, wouldn't it?
But we do have our own oxytocin, and I guess there's a question here around feeling connected with people and relating to people. And some people are certainly more extroverted, some more introverted. That's a kind of a natural variation.
There are attachment styles as well. You've got that avoidant, sort of self-sufficient versus the ambivalent or sort of anxiously seeking connection style. So there are differences.
Yeah, and when we use a word like attachment, when we use it from a mindfulness perspective, we're talking about that sort of mental identification with it, which is different to connection, feeling a connection to somebody. But I think that the natural kind of relationship between people is one of connection, is one of compassion, is one of consideration, is one of care for others, whether we know them or not, actually. But I think a lot of other things get habituated and socialized into us. And so this natural response is often buried very deep underneath a whole lot of anger or frustration or judgments or stereotypes and various things. And I think that in a kind of a way, we can peel back those layers through mindfulness and start to connect a little bit more with that natural response, the natural connection and compassion for others.
Yeah. I would add to that, though, that under stress, we revert to the older parts of the brain. I mean, you've got a reptilian brain with a mammalian brain on top.
You might have a reptilian brain.
Hey, buddy, you've got one too. We've all got one. And of course, over the top of that's this mammalian brain that helps us to actually have relationships. That's where emotions come from rather than just impulses and reflexes. And then there's the cortex built over the top of that. So you're describing some real kind of cortical thing, not getting caught up in the judgments and the reactions and the stress and et cetera, so that we can feel emotion and feel that bonding. But under moments of serious stress, and I think this is partly what the learner was asking about, we revert to older programs. So we go to fight and flight. We don't necessarily go to sort of tend and befriend. You know, that's almost sort of a layer above. So I think that's sometimes what happens when we're too stressed out. We're just reverting to fight and flight. It's some kind of almost reptilian response. Yeah,
and I think that we're least aware at those times. And if we cultivate mindfulness, the fight or flight reaction might arise, but there's an ability to observe it and stand a step or two back from it and not necessarily having to be dominated by it. And that gives us the opportunity to respond differently.
Yes.
So very interesting question. A lot of learners enjoying the slightly longer practice.
Yeah, they were.
Not a marathon, but it's
a middle distance run. Yeah, and good question about, what do we do when difficult emotions arise while meditating? Well, I mean, this is sort of, I started talking about this before, but we need to learn to allow that emotion to unfold in its own way. I mean, at the end of the day, when we're meditating, what we're doing is we're cultivating a sense of awareness and we're identifying with that. And within the awareness, emotions and thoughts and all sorts of experiences are happening, and the attention wants to go to them. That's a conditioned response we have to give our attention to those experiences. But we want to notice that and come back to that broader sense of awareness and just kind of resting as that and allowing things to come and go. Now, of course, if an emotion or a sensation is really intense, sometimes it's good to give our attention to it and start to investigate it. Like, a strong, physical pain in the body would be a good one. Like noticing, okay, where am I feeling that? What's happening? Or an emotion, okay, how's that unfolding moment to moment? And when we give it that curious attention and stop that sort of push and pull with it, it often just sort of starts to play out in its own way. And then when we feel ready, we come back to the breath or just back to that bigger sense of awareness. And that's really the best way, I think, to work with emotion.
And I think one of the things that makes it very hard sometimes is thinking that mindfulness is about making all of this stuff go away, all the stuff I don't like go away. And it's not about that, but we can learn to relate differently to it, to kind of cultivate that awareness. It's kind of a gentle awareness, a kind of a compassionate awareness within which we hold these things. And I don't mean hold, but they're in awareness, but without the attachment, because they flow in, they flow out. And we can, over time, especially with strong emotions, learn to do that. Or even noisy environments, the attention goes to something, and we just notice that the attention's gone to something.
Yeah.
And just gently bring the attention back, and it goes to something else. And some environments we'll notice will, distract attention more. And that's just what we're noticing, is that distractibility more. And it's not about trying to block it out, because as we know, try to block stuff out, it goes to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a topic that's come up as well this week around multitasking and productivity. And interesting, it's not uncommon that people notice that if taking the foot off the accelerator, all of a sudden, if there's not the constant stimulation, it often, feels quite addictive in a way. As soon as that's removed, there's a kind of exhaustion or an apathy. And I guess it's a kind of like a over-revving the engine and burning up all our fuel.
Yeah.
All of a sudden we stop and we realize we've run out of fuel. And the thing is, can we learn to not get caught up in those highs and lows, addicted to the energy and the activity?
Yeah, it's one of our learners was describing being highly energized and focused, and then lethargic and unmotivated, kind of on a roller coaster, really. But like you said, to not get too addicted and attached to the highs, and just to perhaps do things in a slightly more balanced way might take some of those, extreme kind of variations out of it.
Yeah, and I think that these days especially, we kind of almost don't know that we're alive unless we're being stimulated. And mindfulness can teach us to be very alive to the moment, even in stillness, in fact, especially in stillness, because it is actually the most alive experience. And then there can be a kind of a stillness within the movement, which is a kind of an interesting paradox.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. So anyway, this has been a very rich week, and we've got this week ahead now. And we're going to look at just a small topic, should only take a few minutes, managing emotions, and then mindfulness in daily life, how to sort of bring it more into day-to-day life, and a 20-minute practice too, for those who'd like to, run a little bit further than middle distance, building up. So for those who'd like to take a deeper dive. So thanks, Richard. We'll look forward to being with everybody next week.
Yeah, likewise. See you next week.